And that is the first thought that comes to me, oh no. But it's not, I'm not going to answer that. It is always, how can I help? Because God has put me on this world to help. God has put me on this world to fill needs. And God has put me on this world to tell you about Jesus. And so, although my first thought may be, oh no, my second thought is always, praise the Lord. And my third thought is, Lord, help me to be equal to the need. So, never fear to call me. I'm not saying don't call me. Call me. Talk to me. If you need somebody to talk to. Okay. Life interrupts. Life interrupts. How do you handle interruptions? Neither God nor life look at your personal schedule to make sure that there are no conflicts. Things happen. Things happen to families. Things happen to jobs. Things happen to people. It doesn't look to your schedule. Nothing is perfectly planned out. As you get older, you learn that sometimes interruptions are sent by God. And they are opportunities to minister that you might miss if you ignored them. If you just go on with your project and you don't allow yourself to be interrupted, if you aren't flexible enough to change directions and go the other way, you will miss great opportunities that God may be placing before you. So interruptions are a good thing. He also expressed kindness by affirming them and affirming her. Verse 47, then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. And while Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, don't be afraid. Just believe and she will be healed. And when he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. Stop wailing, Jesus said. She's not dead, but asleep. They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, my child, get up. Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. And then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. And her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Jesus expressed kindness to this woman by affirming her. Why? Because she was an outcast. Because of her disease, this woman is an outcast in her society. They treated her like they treated lepers. And because of her disease, she had not been with her family for 12 years. Her self-esteem must have been as low as it possibly could go. But Jesus affirms her. He affirms her, first of all, by listening to her story of woe. And brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. If you want to be a blessing to others, if you want to be an encouragement to others, if you want to affirm and lift people up, just shut up and listen. Because sometimes people just want to be heard. A preacher recalled once, he said, how are you? To the lady. And she replied, you don't want to know. And he says, she's right. I didn't have time to listen to her. I was hurrying on to do something else. Most of us really don't take time to listen. Irma Bombeck. How many of you remember her? Yeah, she was an interesting person. She told about a time that when she was just tired of listening. She was listening to her son tell in minute detail about a movie that he had just seen, punctuated by at least 1,000 you knows and okay. Then she had received several phone calls filled with mindless chatter that never seemed to end. So it was with genuine relief that she was able to tell the caller on her next phone call that she really had to rush off and go to the airport. She got into a taxi cab, and the taxi cab driver took her to the airport and told all about his son and how he was going to college and making straight A's. Irma had to sit there and listen. She said, but once I got to the airport, I realized that I had come 30 minutes early, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I had a whole 30 minutes in which I didn't have to listen to anyone. I could just sit there and read my book and not be bothered. But no sooner had I opened my book than the elderly female voice said, next to me said, I bet it's cold in Chicago. I suppose, Irma replied without looking up from her book. I haven't been in Chicago for 3 years, the woman said. My son lives there. That's nice. Then the woman continued on, my husband's body is on the plane. We were married for 53 years. I don't drive, you see. And the funeral director was so nice, he drove me to the airport today. Irma recalls that her voice droned on. Here was a woman who didn't want money or advice or counsel. All she wanted was someone to listen to her. And in desperation, she had turned to a total stranger with her story. Irma Bombeck said she continued to talk to me until they announced that we were boarding the plane. We walked onto the plane, and I saw her sit in another section. As I hung up my coat, I heard her say to the person next to her, I hear it's cold in Chicago. There are so many of us who just need somebody, sometime to listen, just to focus on us. Listen to what we have to say. Jesus affirms this woman by healing her. Jesus affirms her by speaking of her faith. You see, at this time, because she was healed, no more would she be considered unclean. Not trying to go into too much detail, but back then in the Jewish faith, if during a certain time of the calendar year or the calendar month, a woman went through a routine that caused bleeding, during that time she was considered unclean. And so you weren't to touch her. And this woman had a bleeding problem all the time. So she was always considered unclean, not just to society, but even to her family. She was an outcast. But Jesus speaks of her faith. No more would she be considered unclean. She could rejoin civilization. She could rejoin her family. And when was the last time you were kind enough to affirm somebody, to build somebody up, to say something nice, or at least just to listen to somebody for the sake of listening? One preacher said, I have never had to apologize for my position, but I have oftentimes had to apologize for my disposition. Have you ever had to apologize for your disposition? Sometimes you may have to think fast, or what you say. And what you say is very important. But how you say it can be even more important. The fact that Jesus didn't want to embarrass the people or get even with them, speaks volumes about who Jesus was and teaches us how we're to affirm one another. There's a story of a 6'10" Texan who walked into a McDonald's. He walked up to the register and he placed his order. He told the girl, "I want half a Big Mac." And she said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I want half a Big Mac." She said, "Well, we've never had that order before. Give me just a minute." So she goes back toward the office where her manager is. Unbeknownst to her, the man follows her. And she said, speaking to the manager, "There's a big klutz out there who's dumber than lead and has ordered half a Big Mac." And just about that moment, she realized that he was standing behind her, and she quickly added, "And this gentleman wants the other half." We need to be aware of other people, because this is a world that will kick you, and kick you when you're down, and kick you when you're out. People who have low self-esteem, people who are outcast by the world, people who are needing to be noticed, people who are needing to be touched, people who are needing to be accepted. And when it comes to kindness, if you do not remember anything from this sermon, this is more important than half a Big Mac. Is this: you and I, we are the kindness of Jesus. Got it? When people come to us, they should experience the kindness of Jesus. That's why it was so important. That's why it's one of the fruits of the Spirit. And that's why we should have it in our life. We should be kind people. We should not be Rambo. We should not be out to get others or out to get even. We are to be kind people. Not snobbish, not mean-spirited, not haughty or proud. We are to be kind people. When people experience us, they should experience Jesus. We have to make the effort. We have to make the effort. Sometimes you may not feel like it. Sometimes it may be inconvenient. Sometimes it may not be according to your schedule. But guess what? God has given you an opportunity. We have to make the effort. Some construction workers were building a high-rise across the street from the hospital. As they were working on the third floor, they noticed a little girl on the third floor of the hospital watching them. And they would wave at her. One day they looked across and the little girl held up a poster that said, "My name is Lisa. What are your names?" The next day they brought poster board to work and markers, and they came back and they wrote their names on the poster board and said, "My name is Bob, my name is Bill, my name is Harry." And they said, "How old are you?" And the next day the little girl held up a sign and said, "I'm 7 years old. How old are you?" Well, this went on for several days. But one day they noticed that Lisa wasn't in her usual place in the window. So at break time, one of the workers called the hospital and asked the third floor nurse. He asked her if she could tell them anything about Lisa. The nurse said that Lisa had taken a turn for the worse and was now in intensive care. So all the workers pitched in together and bought her a teddy bear and put a card on it with their names and sent it to the intensive care unit.